Static crackled across the encrypted JSOC frequency, before flatlining into absolute silence. High in the treacherous peaks of the Hindu Kush, a catastrophic artillery strike obliterated an American Overwatch position. Command stamped the sniper's file with 3 devastating letters, KIA. But the storm was hiding a lethal breathing ghost. The air at 9,000 feet didn't just bite. It chewed through layers of thermal gear and settled deep into the marrow. Chief Petty Officer Rachel Collins adjusted the magnification ring on her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle. Her movements painfully slow, deliberate and practiced. To the untrained eye, she was nothing more than a pile of jagged rocks and wind-blown snow on a precarious ridgeline overlooking the Korangal Valley. To the United States Navy, she was a pioneer, the first female SEAL to successfully navigate the grueling pipeline and earn the Trident and, arguably, the most lethal designated marksman in Naval Special Warfare Command. But the mountains didn't care about accolades, and they certainly didn't care about gender. They only cared about mistakes, and the penalty for a mistake out here was a closed casket funeral. "Windage is shifting, Rachel," her spotter whispered. "Petty Officer First Class." David Miller lay pressed against the freezing shale to her left, his eye glued to the Leupold spotting scope. "Getting gusts up to 25 knots coming off the eastern gorge. Temperature is dropping. We're going to have whiteout conditions in less than 2 hours." "Copy that," Rachel murmured, her voice a low, raspy drawl that barely disturbed the icy air in front of her face. "Keep your eyes on the compound. Voss isn't going to let a storm delay his payday. Operation Broken Anvil had been in motion for 3 grueling weeks. Their target, Heinrich Voss, a rogue paramilitary contractor who had successfully stolen 4 canisters of weaponized VX nerve gas from a defunct Soviet bunker in Tajikistan. Intelligence indicated Voss was meeting a buyer deep in this lawless Afghan corridor. Rachel and David had been inserted via high-altitude, low-opening halo jump 3 days prior, hiking 20 miles through unforgiving terrain just to establish this hide site. Through the crosshairs of her optic, Rachel watched the heavily fortified compound nearly 1,200 yards below. Armed sentries patrolled the perimeter, their breath pluming in the freezing air. "Vehicle approaching from the south," David noted, his voice tightening. 2 armored SUVs. Looks like our buyer." Rachel tightened her grip on the rifle, her breathing slowing into the familiar rhythmic cadence of a predator preparing to strike. She dialed in the dope on her scope, adjusting for elevation temperature and the aggressive crosswind. "I have visual, waiting for positive identification on Voss." 10 minutes passed in agonizing silence. Finally, the heavy wooden doors of the compound swung open. A tall man in a heavy wolf fur coat stepped out, flanked by armed mercenaries. Even through the distorted thermal haze of the optic, Rachel recognized the sharp, cruel jawline of Heinrich Voss. "Target acquired," Rachel said smoothly, her finger brushing the curved metal of the trigger. "Range 1,240 yards. David calculated rapidly. "Hold left edge of the target. Elevation is good. Send it when you're—" David never finished his sentence. A sudden piercing whine tore through the thin mountain air, a sound every operator recognized with cold dread. It was the incoming shriek of an 82mm mortar shell. "Incoming!" David roared, grabbing Rachel's shoulder to drag her back from the ledge. They had been compromised, not by a wandering shepherd, but by Voss's advanced counter-surveillance drones, which had silently mapped the ridge using thermal imaging disguised by the incoming storm front. The first shell impacted 30 yards behind them, shattering the rocky outcrop and sending a lethal shower of granite shrapnel tearing through the air. The concussion hit Rachel like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs and violently slamming her face against the icy ground. "Move, move, move!" David yelled, scrambling to his feet to provide covering fire with his M4 carbine. The second shell found its mark. It struck the precise lip of the ridge where Rachel's hide site was established. The world erupted into blinding white light and deafening thunder. Rachel felt the ground simply vanish beneath her. She reached out blindly in the smoke and chaos, her hand brushing David's tactical vest for a fraction of a second before the entire rock face gave way. "David!" she screamed, but her voice was instantly swallowed by the roar of the explosion and the terrifying rumble of collapsing stone. Thousands of tons of rock, snow, and ice sheared off the side of the mountain. Rachel was thrown backward into the void, tumbling into the blinding, freezing abyss. The sky and the earth spun in a violent kaleidoscope of grey and white. She struck a jutting rock, outcropping the sickening crack of her own ribs, echoing in her ears before bouncing off the ledge and plunging deeper into the dark, swirling heart of the blizzard. At the Joint Operations Center in Bagram, Commander Thomas Reed stared at the massive digital map dominating the war room. The green icons representing Collins and Miller had suddenly flashed yellow, then dead red. "Status," Reed barked, leaning over the console of his communications officer. "Lost telemetry, sir," the comms officer replied, frantically typing on his keyboard. "Heart rate monitors went offline simultaneously. We have a massive seismic event reported on Grid Alpha 6. Looks like a localized avalanche triggered by heavy ordnance." "Get eyes on that ridge right now," Reed ordered, his jaw set like stone. "Storm is too thick, Commander. Drones are blind. We can't push a medevac chopper through that wind shear without losing the birds." Commander Reed stared at the red icons that had just faded from the screen, leaving nothing but an empty topographical map. The deadliest female sniper in the Navy and one of his best men had just been wiped off the board in the blink of an eye. "Spin up the quick reaction force," Reed said softly, his voice heavy with dread. "Tell them to be ready the second the weather breaks. We're going to bring our people home." The blizzard raged for 14 excruciating hours. Back at the JOC, the atmosphere was a suffocating blanket of silence. Everyone in the room knew the brutal mathematics of survival in the Hindu Kush. At 30 degrees below zero, without shelter, human life expired in minutes, not hours. When the storm finally broke enough to allow a narrow flight window, a pair of heavily armed MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters tore through the valley, depositing a 12-man SEAL quick reaction force onto the shattered remains of the ridge. Lieutenant Commander Jack Harris led the recovery team, moving methodically through the fresh snowfall and blackened craters left by the mortar barrage. The devastation was absolute. The entire northern edge of the cliff had sheared off, leaving a sheer 800-foot drop into a rocky gorge below. "Over here," one of the operators shouted, waving his hand. Harris trudged over to the lip of the crater. Half buried in the snow was a shredded Kevlar vest and the mangled remains of Petty Officer David Miller. The medic rushed forward, but a single glance was enough. Shrapnel had killed him instantly before the ledge collapsed. "Damn it," Harris hissed. "Where's Collins?" The team fanned out, securing the perimeter and digging through the rubble. 10 minutes later, they found it. Wedged between two massive boulders at the very edge of the abyss was the twisted, shattered barrel of an M2-010 sniper rifle. Beside it lay a torn, bloody piece of a snow camouflage ghillie suit. The medic tested the frozen blood on the fabric. "It's O-negative, Commander," the medic reported grimly. "It's Collins's blood type." Looking at the amount of blood and the trajectory of the blast crater, the explosion blew her right off the edge. Harris walked to the precipice, looking down into the deep, fog-choked ravine. "Can we rappel down?" "Negative," the squad leader replied. "Winds are picking up again, and that rock face is too unstable from the mortars. Even if she survived the blast, which the blood loss says she didn't, an 800-foot fall onto jagged shale is unsurvivable. There's nothing down there but a body." Harris keyed his radio, his voice heavy with the crushing weight of a failed rescue. "Command, this is Vulture 1 Actual. We have recovered the remains of Petty Officer Miller. We have also located the destroyed primary weapon and significant blood trails belonging to Chief Collins, leading off an 800-foot sheer drop." He paused, closing his eyes against the biting wind. "Command. Mark Chief Petty Officer Rachel Collins as KIA. We are RTB." In Bagram, Commander Reed slowly lowered his head, resting his hands on the console. The room remained dead silent. The first female SEAL, a legend in the making, gone. "Make the notifications," Reed whispered to his adjutant. "Tell the Navy. Tell her family. She died in the line of duty." But the United States Navy had severely underestimated exactly what Rachel Collins was capable of surviving. 400 feet below the shattered ridge, enveloped in the grey, swirling mist of the gorge, Rachel Collins opened her eyes. She didn't wake up peacefully. She woke up screaming silently, her lungs completely paralyzed by the agonizing pain radiating from her chest. She spat out a mouthful of blood and snow desperately clawing at the frozen ground. She hadn't fallen 800 feet. During her descent, her tactical harness had snagged violently on the thick, gnarled roots of a dead mountain pine, jutting out from a narrow, sloping snow shelf halfway down the cliff. The impact had snapped the tree root, but the brief deceleration had been just enough to keep her from breaking her spine when she hit the deep snowdrift below. Rachel lay on her back, staring up at the slate-grey sky, waiting for her vision to stop spinning. Pain was an old friend, but this was a masterclass. She performed a rigid mental and physical diagnostic, a trick taught during Hell Week. Toes wiggling, legs intact, left arm functional. Right arm, her hand shot to her right side, her fingers tracing the outline of her tactical vest. She found a deep, jagged tear just below her ribs, where a piece of mortar shrapnel had sliced through her side. It was bleeding, but the extreme cold had partially frozen the wound, slowing the hemorrhage. 2 ribs were definitely fractured. "Miller," she croaked, her throat raw. She tapped her earpiece. "Miller, sit rep." Nothing but the howling wind answered her. She forced herself to sit up, a wave of nausea washing over her. She looked up at the sheer cliff face. It was impossible to climb back up in her condition. She looked down. Another 400 feet to the valley floor, but the slope here was more forgiving, a steep, treacherous decline of loose rock and snow that could be carefully navigated. She checked her gear. Her primary sniper rifle was gone, shattered on the ridge above. Her survival radio was smashed, but strapped to her right thigh, untouched, was her Sig Sauer P226 sidearm, and slung across her back, miraculously intact, was her secondary weapon, a customized MK-12 special-purpose rifle equipped with a medium-range optic and a suppressor. Rachel stood up, leaning heavily against the rock wall. She was alone, severely injured, completely cut off from command, and officially a ghost. Standard protocol dictated she find a secure location, administer medical care, and wait for a rescue team that she knew wasn't coming, not down here in the ravine. She unslung the MK-12, checking the chamber. A sleek brass 5.56mm round gleamed back at her. Voss was still out there. The explosion meant he knew JSOC was watching, which meant he was going to finalize the nerve gas transaction and vanish into the black market wind immediately. If she waited, Voss would escape, and thousands of innocent people would die from the VX gas. Rachel reached into a tactical pouch, pulling out a sealed packet of quick-clotting gauze. She bit down on her leather glove and aggressively packed the shrapnel wound in her side, letting out a muffled, agonizing groan as the chemicals burned into her torn flesh. She wrapped it tight with a field bandage, pulled her torn ghillie hood over her head, and racked the charging handle of her rifle. Command might have declared her dead, but she wasn't finished. With a brutal limping gait, Chief Petty Officer Rachel Collins began her descent toward the valley floor, disappearing entirely into the heart of the blinding storm. She wasn't just a Navy SEAL anymore. She was a ghost with a gun, and she had a debt to collect. The descent to the valley floor took 3 agonizing hours. Every step Rachel Collins took was a brutal negotiation between gravity-slipping shale and the searing white-hot agony radiating from her fractured ribs. Her own blood had frozen to her side, acting as a crude, icy splint, but the relentless cold was beginning to dull her reflexes. Hypothermia was a creeping, silent executioner, and she knew she had less than an hour of operational clarity left before her organs began to shut down entirely. The storm that had masked the enemy's drone was now her greatest ally. A blinding squall of white powder blanketed the Korangal Valley, dropping visibility to less than 30 feet. Through the howling gale, the harsh, unnatural glow of halogen floodlights bled into the snow the perimeter of Heinrich Voss's fortified compound. Rachel dropped into a snowdrift just outside the outer razor-wire fence, her breathing shallow and ragged. She activated her PVS-31 panoramic night vision goggles. The world snapped into a crisp phosphorescent green, piercing the blizzard's veil. 4 perimeter sentries were patrolling the fence line, their shoulders hunched against the wind. They moved with the disciplined tactical spacing of highly trained mercenaries. These weren't local insurgents. These were ex-military contractors, likely former operators from disgraced private security firms like Defion International or the remnants of rogue executive outcomes units. They were professionals, but professionals relied on protocols, and protocols could be exploited. Rachel unslung her Mk-12 special purpose rifle. The weapon felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hands, but the moment she settled the stock against her shoulder muscle memory overrode her physical trauma. She was a sniper. The rifle was merely an extension of her own nervous system. She tracked the trailing guard, a massive man carrying a PKM machine gun. He paused to light a cigarette, breaking his situational awareness for exactly 2 seconds. Rachel exhaled, letting the air empty from her battered lungs, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed Mk-12 coughed a sharp mechanical thwack, instantly swallowed by the howling wind. The 5.56mm round caught the mercenary directly beneath the edge of his Kevlar helmet. He crumpled into the snow without a single cry, dead before his cigarette even hit the ground. Rachel didn't pause. She shifted her optic to the second guard who had turned to check on his fallen comrade. A second suppressed shot dropped him instantly. The remaining 2 guards realized they were under attack, their radios crackling to life, but in the whiteout conditions they had no idea where the fire was coming from. Panic replaced discipline. One blindly fired a burst from his AK-47 into the darkness, revealing his exact muzzle flash. Rachel placed 2 rounds center mass into his chest armor, followed by a surgical shot to the exposed bridge of his nose. The 4th guard lunged for the alarm panel near the gate. Rachel chambered another round, ignoring the screaming pain in her side, and severed his brain stem at 40 yards. 4 bodies, 4 seconds. She crawled forward, slipping beneath the razor wire through a drainage culvert, dragging her battered body into the inner courtyard. The compound was an old Soviet-era supply depot, heavily retrofitted with reinforced steel doors and security cameras. Through a frosted window of the main command building, Rachel saw them. Heinrich Voss stood at the head of a long wooden table. Across from him was a man the CIA had been hunting for a decade, Anton Drachev, a ruthless chemical weapons broker who supplied European terror cells. Between them sat 4 olive-drab cylindrical canisters encased in shock-proof Pelican cases. The VX nerve gas, a single drop absorbed through the skin, could kill a grown man in minutes. 4 canisters could wipe out the population of a major metropolitan transit hub. Voss was smiling, gesturing to an open briefcase brimming with bearer bonds. The transaction was complete. They were preparing to move. Rachel checked her ammunition. She had 12 rounds left in her Mk-12 magazine and 1 spare for her sidearm. She was outnumbered at least 10-1 by the heavily armed guards waiting in the adjacent motor pool. A frontal assault was suicide, even for a healthy SEAL. She needed a diversion, and she needed to trap them inside. Limping toward the motor pool, Rachel found a massive diesel generator, roaring aggressively, powering the compound's lights and heating. Next to it sat 3 50-gallon fuel drums. She detached a high-explosive incendiary grenade from her tactical rig, her last piece of heavy ordnance. She pulled the pin, wedged it carefully beneath the primary fuel line of the generator, and rigged a crude tripwire using a piece of deckcord attached to the motor pool door. It was time to introduce herself. She moved to the heavy steel door of the command building, stacking up on the hinge side. She took a deep breath, the frozen air burning her lacerated lungs, and kicked the door open. The heavy steel door banged against the concrete wall, momentarily shocking the room. For a split second, the mercenaries inside just stared. Standing in the doorway covered in frost blood and the torn remnants of a sniper's ghillie suit, Rachel Collins looked like an avenging demon dredged up from the depths of the mountain. Before a single guard could raise his weapon, Rachel moved. She fired 2 rapid shots, dropping Drachev's heavily armed bodyguards in the corner. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Voss, recognizing the lethal precision of a JSOC operator, didn't try to fight. He grabbed one of the VX canisters and lunged toward the reinforced back exit, using Drachev as a human shield. Drachev screamed in Russian, pulling his own sidearm, but Rachel's Mk-12 tracked him with terrifying speed. A single round shattered his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. "Kill her!" Voss roared over his shoulder to his remaining contractors, throwing his weight against the heavy exit door. 3 mercenaries opened fire, shredding the wooden table and the concrete walls where Rachel had been standing, a fraction of a second prior. But she had already dropped into a prone position, sliding across the bloody, freezing floor. She fired from her back, taking out the knee of the first contractor, then driving a fatal round through the bottom of his jaw as he collapsed. The second guard's rifle jammed a fatal mistake. Rachel transitioned to her P226 sidearm, firing 3 shots into his chest. Suddenly the compound shook violently. Outside, a mercenary had kicked open the motor pool door, triggering Rachel's booby trap. The diesel drums detonated with catastrophic force, engulfing the entire courtyard in a massive fireball. The explosion knocked out the main generator. The command building was instantly plunged into pitch darkness, save for the flickering orange glow of the fires raging outside. In the dark, the ghost ruled supreme. Rachel slapped her night vision goggles back down. The remaining guard was blindly sweeping his rifle side to side, blinded by the sudden shift in light. Rachel rose silently behind him, wrapping her arm around his throat and driving her combat knife deeply between his tactical plates. She lowered him quietly to the ground. She turned her attention to the back door. It hung open on its hinges, the howling wind rushing into the room. Voss had escaped into the blizzard with 1 canister. The other 3 were still secured in the Pelican cases on the floor. Rachel stumbled toward the door, her vision blurring as the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by the crushing reality of her blood loss. She stepped out into the raging storm. Voss was running toward a modified snowcat vehicle, parked at the edge of the helipad, clutching the olive-drab cylinder to his chest. He was 70 yards away. In normal conditions, it was a shot Rachel could make with her eyes closed. But her hands were shaking violently from the cold her heart was misfiring, and the Mk-12 was a medium-range rifle fighting a 20-knot crosswind. "You don't get to walk away," Rachel whispered to the wind. She dropped to 1 knee, ignoring the agonizing pop of her fractured ribs. She wrapped her sling tightly around her forearm to stabilize the rifle resting the barrel on a frozen snowbank. She forced her breathing to slow, entering the deeply meditative state of the sniper's bubble. The pain vanished. The cold vanished. There was only the reticle, the wind, and the target. Voss reached the snowcat. He turned back, raising a heavy magnum revolver to lay down covering fire. Rachel squeezed the trigger. The 5.56mm bullet cut through the blizzard, a flawless, mathematically perfect trajectory. It struck Heinrich Voss dead center in the forehead. He collapsed backward against the snowcat, dead, before he hit the ground, the VX canister tumbling harmlessly into the soft snow beside him. Rachel lowered the rifle. The compound was silent, save for the roaring flames of the destroyed motor pool. She dragged herself across the snow, securing the final canister and bringing it back to the command building. She collapsed against the wall, her body finally reaching its absolute limit. She reached out with a trembling, blood-soaked glove, pulling a heavy satellite radio from the chest rig of one of the dead mercenaries. She adjusted the frequency to the encrypted JSOC emergency channel. It took 3 attempts to press the transmission button. Overwatch. This is Vulture 2. Rachel rasped her voice, barely a whisper against the static. 2,000 miles away in Bagram, Commander Thomas Reed was staring blankly at the after-action report of the failed mission when the JOC's emergency speaker crackled to life. "Say again, unknown station," the comms officer replied, frowning. "This frequency is restricted. This is Chief Petty Officer Rachel Collins." The voice echoed through the war room, instantly freezing every single person in their tracks. Commander Reed leaped out of his chair, sprinting to the console. "Rachel!" Reed shouted into the mic, his voice breaking. "Collins, is that you? We declared you KIA. Reports of my death were premature, Commander." Rachel coughed, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. "Target Voss is neutralized. Bayer is neutralized. I have secured all 4 VX canisters at coordinates." She gave the grid reference of the compound, her voice growing fainter. "I'm bleeding out, Commander. Bring a bird, or bring a body bag. Your call." The radio went silent. Reed turned to his men, his eyes blazing with a mixture of absolute disbelief and overwhelming pride. "Spin up every medevac in the theater. Get the QRF back in the air. I want a gunship circling that compound in 20 minutes. Do you hear me?" The JOC erupted into frantic, joyous action. Rachel let the radio slip from her fingers. She leaned her head back against the cold concrete wall, watching the flames from the motor pool dance against the falling snow. For the first time in 3 days, she allowed herself to close her eyes. She had done her job. She had survived the storm. And as the distant, rhythmic thumping of approaching Black Hawk helicopter rotors began to echo through the Karangal Valley, the ghost of the Hindu Kush finally rested. The legend of Rachel Collins proves that the human spirit is the deadliest weapon on the battlefield. Did her impossible survival against all odds leave you breathless? If you love gripping real-life tactical dramas and stories of unbroken resilience, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this intense narrative with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding, cinematic military stories delivered straight to you. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next operation.